Marin pulled into my duplex driveway on a rainy Tuesday in March, with the kind of determination people get when they've already decided they're leaving and they just need their body to catch up. Her Subaru Forester was dented along the rear panel and packed so tight, the back window looked like it was trying to breathe through a wall of boxes. The wipers dragged across the windshield in slow, tired squeaks, and she didn't even shut the engine off. She left it running like she was afraid the car might not start again, or like she wanted the option to disappear the second she finished whatever this was. I stood in my doorway in sweatpants with my hair half wet from a shower I hadn't finished enjoying, watching my older sister sit behind the wheel with both hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead like she was waiting for the rain to give her permission. Then she opened the door, stepped out, and walked around to the passenger side without looking at me. Eli climbed out behind her, small and stiff in a puffy jacket that was too thin for Oregon winter pretending to be spring, holding a bright blue lunchbox covered in astronauts like it was the only thing tethering him to the planet. He didn't run. He didn't ask where they were. He didn't smile when he saw me. He just followed Marin to the porch, the way kids follow adults when the air feels wrong. When they don't know what danger is coming, but they can smell it anyway. Marin guided him to my welcome mat, like she was delivering a package and needed the signature. She didn't bring the boxes. She didn't say, "Can we talk?" She didn't make up a story about staying for a week or needing a place while she figured something out. She stood there with rain beading on her hair and her jacket darkened along the shoulders, and she set down a canvas tote bag at my feet. Not a duffel, not a suitcase, just a tote bag, the kind you bring home from a farmer's market when you bought too many apples. Top off of it, she placed a clear plastic pharmacy sack full of pill bottles. The bottles knocked softly together, that dry rattle of plastic and medicine, and the sound made my stomach tighten before my brain even caught up. Then she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and pressed it into my hand. Her handwriting, usually sharp and pretty, looked like it had been written while her hand was shaking. It was covered in numbers and times and abbreviations I didn't understand. Units, corrections, carbs. It looked like a math test designed by a person who hated children. "Marin," I said, because that was all I could find in my throat at first. My sister finally looked at me, and I realized she hadn't looked at Eli once since stepping out of the car. Her eyes were glossy, but not with tears. More like she was trying not to cry by turning herself into glass. She took a breath like she was about to give a speech, and what came out was the shortest explanation of her life. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "I found something, a place in Arizona. It's a reset. I need a reset." The word reset hit me like she'd said vacation. Like she'd said spa. Like she'd said I'm going to reboot my life like it's a phone that's acting up. I stared at her, trying to understand how you reset away from your child, and my eyes flicked down to Eli, who was staring at a crack in the concrete step like he'd learned a long time ago that eye contact makes adults notice you, and being noticed can be dangerous. His fingers were white around the lunchbox handle. His lower lip trembled once, and then he bit it hard, like he was swallowing the tremble back down. I opened my mouth to ask a dozen questions. What place? What plan? What the hell are you doing? Is he okay? Are you sick? Are you high? Did something happen? But Marin didn't give me room. She nodded toward the pharmacy bag like it was a grocery list I'd requested. "His meds are in there," she said quickly. "He knows the schedule. It's on the paper." "He knows the schedule?" I repeated, because it sounded impossible. He was 9. 9-year-olds knew their spelling words and their favorite YouTubers. They did not know the schedule, for prescription bottles rattling in a sack like loose coins. Marin's jaw tightened, and for a split second I saw the old Marin, the one who hated being questioned, the one who always needed the room to accept her version of reality without pushing back. She glanced past me into my duplex like she could already see the life she was dropping onto my floor. Then she looked back at me, and her voice went softer, almost careful, like she was trying to make this sound less ugly than it was. "He'll be better here," she said. "Better here," I echoed, and my voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. "Marin, what are you?" She cut me off by saying the sentence that cracked the world open. She looked at me directly and she said, "He's yours now. Not can you take him for a while, not I need help, not please, just ownership, transferred like a title. He's yours now." I felt my body go cold and hot at the same time, like shock couldn't decide what temperature to be. I looked at Eli again, willing him to do something, say something, run to me, ask what was happening. But he stayed silent, staring down, clutching that lunchbox like it could protect him. Maren leaned down and kissed the top of his head too fast, like touching him hurt her, like affection was something she needed to get over with before it made her change her mind. Eli didn't react. He didn't lean into her. He didn't pull away. He just stood there, rigid, the way kids stand when they've learned not to expect comfort. Then Maren turned without another word and walked back to her running car. I stepped forward automatically, like my body wanted to stop her, even if my brain hadn't formed the plan yet, but she was already climbing into the driver's seat. She didn't look back. She put the Subaru in reverse, like backed out of my driveway in one smooth motion, and drove away into the rain like she was escaping a crime scene. I stood in my doorway holding a sheet of numbers I didn't understand and a plastic bag of medications I didn't know how to use, with a 9-year-old beside me, who hadn't spoken a single word, and watched her taillights dissolve into the wet grey street until there was nothing left but the sound of the rain and the engine of my own life idling in place, waiting for me to decide what to do next. The first 3 months after Maren drove away were a blur of alarms, numbers, and a kind of fear that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. I didn't get a dramatic moment to adjust. There was no clean break between before and after. One day I was a night shift dispatcher whose biggest worry was whether I'd packed enough leftovers for a 12-hour shift, and the next I was setting my phone to buzz every 2 hours so I could check a 9-year-old's blood sugar while he slept on my couch. I learned quickly that type 1 diabetes doesn't care if you're new to it. It doesn't slow down because you're overwhelmed. It demands precision from people who are exhausted and confidence from people who are terrified. The first time I had to measure out Eli's insulin on my own, my hands shook so badly I had to sit down. He watched me with those steady 2 old eyes and said quietly, "It's okay. Mom used to mess up sometimes too." That word "mom" landed in the room like something fragile. I didn't correct him. I didn't claim it either. I just nodded and focused on getting the dose right. My life turned into a schedule written in permanent ink. 6:30 a.m., home from dispatch. 7:15, wake Eli, check his levels. 8:10, school drop-off. 10, collapse into bed for 4 hours of shallow sleep. 2:30 p.m., school pickup. 3, snack calculation. 5:45, dinner dose. 2 a.m., wake up in the dark and tiptoe to the couch to prick his finger while he half slept and trusted me not to hurt him. I learned how to count carbs in my head like mental math was oxygen. I learned what low looked like in his face before the monitor even beeped, how his skin went pale, how his voice thinned out. I learned that fear can keep you upright longer than coffee ever could. But fear is expensive. It costs sleep. It costs patience. It costs softness. The financial reality came fast and hard. My insurance wouldn't cover Eli because he wasn't legally my dependent yet. I filed for state assistance the first week, but paperwork moves slowly when you need it to sprint. In the meantime, everything came out of my pocket. Test strips, insulin refills, emergency snacks for his backpack, copays for the pediatric endocrinologist who spoke in calm, clinical tones, while I scribbled notes like I was studying for an exam I couldn't afford to fail. I maxed out one credit card by the end of the second month and opened another with an interest rate so high it felt personal. I stopped buying anything unnecessary. I ate scrambled eggs and toast most nights, so Eli could have balanced meals. I told myself it was temporary. Everything is temporary if you say it enough times. Nolan lasted exactly 11 weeks into this new life. At first he tried. He brought over takeout. He sat with Eli while I double-checked doses. But I could see the strain building in him, the way he hesitated before coming over, the way his texts got shorter. One night, while I was on hold with the pharmacy arguing about a refill they claimed was too soon, my phone buzzed. "I don't think I'm cut out for this kind of responsibility," the message read. "I'm sorry." That was it. No fight, no long explanation, just a quiet exit. I stared at the screen for a moment, waiting for the hurt to arrive in full force, but it didn't. I didn't have room for heartbreak. I had a child who needed juice boxes in the middle of the night. So I set my phone down and went back to calculating carbs. Maren called once during those months, not to ask about Eli's A1C levels or whether he'd made friends at school. She called to tell me not to involve anyone. "If you report anything, it'll make me look unstable," she said, like instability wasn't already echoing through my kitchen. I could hear laughter in the background, music, the sound of a life that did not include finger pricks or 2 a.m. alarms. I hung up, feeling hollowed out. What I didn't expect was how quiet Eli was through all of it. He didn't complain about the needles. He didn't ask when his mom was coming back. He followed the schedule like it was a school assignment he intended to ace. One night, after I'd fumbled a dose and had to double-check the math 3 times, he looked at me and said, "You're doing good." I almost broke right there in the kitchen. Because I wasn't doing good. I was surviving. I was duct-taping each day together and hoping it held. But to him, I was steady. And somewhere between the alarms and the pharmacy calls and the empty space Nolan left behind, I realized something simple and terrifying. This wasn't temporary. This was my life now. And whether I felt ready or not, Eli was depending on me to be the one person who didn't walk away. The night everything began to shift wasn't dramatic. There was no collapse, no shouting, no moment where I hit a visible bottom. It was just another ER visit after Eli caught a stomach virus and his blood sugar refused to cooperate. Dehydration and type 1 diabetes are a dangerous combination, and by the time we got to the hospital he was pale, glassy-eyed, and quieter than usual. I sat beside his bed in a stiff plastic chair, listening to the soft beeping of monitors and the hum of fluorescent lights, and I felt something inside me thinning out. I was running on fumes, financially, emotionally, physically. I hadn't slept more than 4 consecutive hours in months. I was juggling debt, legal confusion, and the constant fear that I might miss something critical. I remember staring at the IV line taped to Eli's small hand and thinking, I cannot do this alone forever. Not like this. That's when Maribel Santos walked into the room. She introduced herself as a hospital case manager, her voice calm but not overly gentle, the kind of tone that suggests competence instead of pity. She had silver threaded through her dark braid and reading glasses perched low on her nose. She'd apparently seen us before. "You've been here a few times," she said kindly, not accusingly, and she pulled up a chair across from me like she had nowhere else to be. She didn't start with form, she didn't start with policy. She looked me in the eye and asked, "Who's helping you?" The honest answer was nobody. But I hesitated, because saying it out loud felt like admitting failure. "I'm managing," I said instead, which was my standard response to anything overwhelming. Maribel didn't buy it. She nodded once as if she'd heard that line 100 times before, and opened a thick folder. Over the next hour, she asked practical questions about guardianship, insurance, income, support systems. When I admitted I didn't have legal custody and that Eli's medical bills were stacking up faster than I could track them, she didn't look shocked. She just started making notes. Within 2 weeks, things began to move. Maribel pushed Eli's state medical assistance application through channels I didn't even know existed. The approval came through retroactively, which meant some of the bills that had been haunting me shrank to manageable amounts. I cried in my kitchen when the letter arrived. Not graceful tears, just the kind that come when you've been bracing for impact and suddenly someone cushions the blow. She also connected me with a non-profit that helped cover pediatric medical supplies. That's how Eli got his continuous glucose monitor. The first night it beeped to warn me of a dropping level before he even felt shaky. I stood in the hallway holding my phone and realized I could finally exhale a little. Technology became a small mercy. The biggest shift, though, came in the form of a referral to a family law attorney named Hugh Mercer. His office sat above a laundromat, and the whole place smelled faintly of detergent and burnt coffee. Hugh wore mismatched socks and had a habit of tapping his pen against legal pads while he thought. He didn't sugarcoat anything. "You need guardianship," he said plainly. "Without it, you're balancing on borrowed time." We filed the paperwork that week. It felt surreal to see my name on forms that labelled me as Eli's primary caregiver. Notices were sent to Maren. She didn't respond. Part of me had expected a fight, some dramatic objection, but there was nothing. Silence. After 7 weeks, temporary guardianship was granted. The day I walked out of the courthouse with that stamped order in my bag, I felt steadier than I had in months. It wasn't a parade, it wasn't a celebration, but it was proof that I had legal ground beneath my feet. Around the same time, my job situation reached a breaking point. Night shifts were destroying me, and my supervisor's patience was thinning. Through a connection Hugh had, I interviewed for a logistics coordinator position at a medical supply company. Daytime hours, better pay, actual health benefits that could eventually cover Eli properly. When they offered me the job, I said yes before fear could talk me out of it. The first week at the new job, Eli started calling the duplex our place. Just casually, like it had always belonged to both of us. I noticed the shift immediately. He was laughing more. He joined the robotics club at school. He started correcting me on carb counts with a half smile, like we were a team instead of a crisis. And maybe that was the real turning point. Not the paperwork or the insurance approval, but the quiet realization that we weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something. Not perfect, not easy, but stable. And for the first time since that rainy Tuesday, I didn't feel like I was bracing for disaster every second of the day. I felt like we might actually be moving forward. The years after that didn't explode into some cinematic transformation. There was no single moment where everything suddenly became easy. Instead, life settled into something steadier, almost ordinary, and after what we'd lived through, ordinary felt like a gift. Eli grew taller in increments I didn't notice until one day I realized he was looking me in the eye instead of up at me. His voice deepened. His shoulders broadened. He learned to change his own sensor on his glucose monitor and double-check his insulin doses without prompting. The fear that had once wrapped around him like a second skin began to loosen. He still carried it. It never completely leaves a kid who's been abandoned, but it no longer defined the way he moved through the world. Academically, he surprised everyone except me. Maybe it was the discipline diabetes forced on him, or maybe he was just wired that way. But he approached school the same way he approached his health, methodical, focused, relentless. By sophomore year, he was staying after school for robotics meetings and tutoring other students in math. I'd watch him at the kitchen table, our table now, scarred and sturdy, sketching designs for some competition project, and I'd feel this quiet swell in my chest. Not pride in the loud bragging sense, pride in the steady, grounded way. The kind that says, we made it through something that could have broken us. Maren drifted in and out of the edges of our lives like static. She sent a birthday text one year, tell him happy birthday for me, as if I were a receptionist. Another year she mailed a card with no return address and $20 tucked inside, like that could stitch 9 years back together. She never asked about his A1C, never asked what grade he was in. When the legal case for identity theft wrapped up, she took a plea deal, reduced charges, probation, restitution she barely paid. I thought I'd feel vindicated when consequences finally caught up to her. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Consequences didn't give us back what she'd taken. They just closed a chapter. Darlene's reckoning came slower. For years she'd defended Maren with a stubbornness that bordered on denial. She's sensitive, she'd say. She just needs time. But time has a way of eroding illusions. When she slipped in the shower and had to admit she couldn't manage alone anymore, something in her shifted. I became the one she called for doctor's appointments and medication organization, the one who drove her to physical therapy on Thursdays. She didn't say much about the past. She wasn't good at apologies. But I noticed how her eyes lingered on Eli now, really lingered, like she was trying to memorize who he'd become. Sometimes regret shows up quietly, in the way someone looks at what they almost lost. By the time Eli turned 17, the house felt different. Not bigger, not fancier, just fuller. We'd moved from crisis mode into routine. Sunday mornings meant pancakes and glucose checks. Weeknights meant homework at the table while I answered emails from work. We argued about normal things, whether teal was blue, whether he needed another pair of sneakers, whether he could drive to Portland with friends. The first time he asked to borrow the car, I had to step into the hallway and breathe through the wave of panic that rose up. Letting him go, even for an hour, felt like trusting the world with something precious. Then the acceptance letter came. Oregon State University. Engineering program. Partial scholarship. He made me open the envelope because his hands were shaking. When I read the first line, "We are pleased to inform you," my voice cracked so badly I had to start over. He whooped, loud and sharp, then grabbed me in a hug so tight my ribs protested. I thought about that rainy Tuesday, about the pharmacy bag, about the nights I'd sat awake watching numbers on a screen, and here he was, standing in our kitchen, future unfolding in front of him like it had always belonged there. 2 days later, Maren called. Her voice was careful, almost rehearsed. She talked about growth, about healing, about wanting to reconnect. My stomach tightened in that familiar way, the way it does when you sense an agenda hiding under soft words. A week later, I heard from Darlene's neighbor that Mom had been meeting with a lawyer to update her will. The pieces slid into place quietly. Maren wasn't coming back for closure. She was coming back for inheritance. When she suggested dinner, all of us, like old times, I said yes. Not because I believed her intentions had changed, but because Eli had been waiting for his moment. And I had learned over the years that sometimes closure doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives with a set table, steady hands, and the courage to say the truth out loud. Sunday dinner at my mother's house smelled like roast chicken, rosemary, and something tighter underneath it. Anticipation, maybe, or denial dressed up as hospitality. Darlene had set the table with the good plates, the ones she used to bring out for holidays when Dad was still alive. Maren sat across from me, posture straight, hair freshly cut, wearing a soft cream sweater like she was auditioning for the role of reformed daughter. She smiled too often. She asked careful questions about my job, about the traffic on I-84, about the weather, like we were acquaintances warming up to real conversation. She kept glancing toward the hallway every time she heard a sound, waiting for Eli to appear. I could see her rehearsing reactions in her head. When she finally asked about him, it wasn't the way a mother asks. It was casual, detached. "So, how's the kid doing?" she said, cutting into her chicken like she was discussing a neighbor's son. "He managing okay?" "The kid." I kept my voice even. "He's doing well." That was all she deserved in that moment. 20 minutes later, the front door opened. I didn't have to look up to know it was him. I felt the shift in the air. Eli walked in wearing a charcoal button-down and dark jeans, like he'd chosen something neutral and deliberate. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to stand steady. He nodded at Darlene, gave her a brief hug, then turned toward the table. Maren's fork paused halfway to her mouth. For a second, she genuinely didn't recognize him. The last time she'd seen him, he was 9, small and watchful, hiding behind an astronaut lunchbox. Now he was taller than I was, shoulders squared, confidence worn quietly instead of loudly. The glucose monitor on his arm was visible, unapologetic. She blinked, and I watched recognition spread across her face like a slow dawn, followed by something sharper. Shock, and then something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Hi," she said carefully. "Eli." "Hi, Maren," he replied. Not Mom, not Mother Maren. The name landed between them like a closed door. She tried to recover, asking about school, about engineering, about Oregon State. Eli answered politely, briefly. He didn't give her hostility. He didn't give her warmth either. Just facts. Scholarship. Orientation dates. Dorm assignments. His voice didn't shake. Then Maren shifted the conversation the way she always did, slowly circling toward what she wanted. She talked about Darlene's house, about keeping things in the family, about how she'd been thinking of moving back to Oregon permanently. She used phrases like starting fresh and rebuilding relationships. It was the same language she'd used the day she left. Soft, abstract, carefully vague. Darlene set her fork down. The sound was small, but it cut through the room. "I updated my will," she said, her voice steadier than I'd heard it in years. "The house goes to Callie, and part of it goes into Eli's education fund." Maren went very still. "That's not fair," she said, but she didn't raise her voice. She leaned forward instead, pressing. "I'm your daughter too." Darlene didn't flinch. "You left." 2 words. No embellishment, no lecture, just truth. The silence that followed felt thick enough to touch. That's when Eli reached into his backpack and pulled out a slim folder. He didn't slam it down. He set it gently on the table, aligning it carefully with the edge like he wanted the action itself to be calm. "I wanted to tell you in person," he said, looking directly at Marin. "I'm being adopted by Callie." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. "It's already prepared," he continued, his voice steady in a way that made my throat tighten. "She's the one who raised me. She's the one who stayed. I'm not angry. I just don't want to keep waiting for something that isn't coming." Marin stared at him like he'd physically struck her. But there was no accusation in his tone. No rage, just clarity. "You can't just erase me," she said finally. Eli's expression didn't change. "I'm not erasing you," he said. "You erased yourself." That was the only sharp thing he allowed. Marin pushed her chair back. It scraped loudly across the floor, the first real noise of the evening. She looked at Darlene, then at me, then back at Eli. For a flicker of a second, I thought she might argue, cry. Instead, she stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out. No goodbye. No apology. She left the way she always left, quick, self-contained, as if exit were her most practiced skill. The door shut behind her with a quiet click. No one moved for several seconds. Then Darlene reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her grip wasn't strong anymore, but it was intentional. "I should have protected you both," she said softly. Not a speech, not a performance, just the truth, finally spoken. I didn't forgive everything in that moment. That kind of repair doesn't happen in one sentence. But I squeezed her hand and nodded. Across the table, Eli exhaled slowly. His shoulders relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before, and laughed like he'd been holding that breath for 9 years. And for the first time since that rainy Tuesday, I realized something simple and powerful. We weren't waiting anymore. 63 days after that dinner, I stood in a small courtroom with fluorescent lights humming overhead, while a judge adjusted his glasses and signed a document that made official what had already been true for years. There was no audience, no dramatic speeches, just Eli and me standing side by side, our attorney flipping pages quietly, the clerk stamping papers with methodical precision. When the judge looked up and said, "Congratulations," it felt almost understated, like he'd just approved a building permit instead of sealing a family together. Eli glanced at me and I saw something settle in his face. Not excitement exactly, but certainty. The kind that comes when something long unstable finally locks into place. I didn't cry in the courtroom. I held it together. I've always been good at holding it together. We didn't throw a party. That wasn't our style. Instead, we drove back to Gresham and stopped at the same greasy burger place we'd gone to after his guardianship hearing years earlier. The tables were still sticky. The fries were still perfect. We slid into a booth, the vinyl squeaking under us, and Eli grinned in that sideways way of his. "So," he said, dipping a fry into ketchup, "is there like a handbook now? Am I legally required to call you Mom?" I laughed before I could stop myself. "Absolutely not," I said. "You can call me whatever you've been calling me." He chewed thoughtfully, then nodded. "Calmom still works," he said. "Feels accurate." Half nickname, half truth, entirely ours. Life didn't change overnight after that. The bills didn't vanish. Work still demanded spreadsheets and meetings and early alarms. Eli still had to count carbs and manage sensors and argue with insurance companies about coverage. But something fundamental had shifted. There was no legal grey area anymore. No technical loophole that could undo what we'd built. We belonged to each other in every sense. The summer before college passed in a blur of packing lists and dorm supply debates. We argued for 15 full minutes in a Target aisle about whether his comforter was teal or blue. He insisted teal. I insisted blue. The fact that we could waste time on colour theory felt like a luxury I didn't take lightly. We loaded my car, now a slightly newer Subaru with a dent in the rear bumper that I refused to fix, until the back seat looked like a dorm room exploded inside it. Boxes of textbooks, a desk lamp, extra glucose sensors, a framed photo he insisted on bringing, the one from years ago when he'd been small and I'd looked perpetually exhausted but fiercely determined. The drive to Corvallis was quieter than I expected. We talked about classes, about engineering labs, about how often he planned to come home. I tried not to overdo it with advice. He didn't need a lecture. He needed room. When we pulled into the dorm parking lot, everything felt surreal. Parents everywhere hauling mini fridges and laundry baskets, freshmen trying to look confident while clearly terrified. Eli stepped out of the car and stretched, looking older than I was ready for. We carried his things up 2 flights of stairs to a narrow room with 2 beds and a window that overlooked a patch of grass pretending to be a quad. He set the framed photo on his desk before anything else. That's when my throat tightened. We finished unpacking, adjusted his desk chair, plugged in his monitor charger. I kept my hands busy so my emotions wouldn't get the upper hand. But when it was time to leave, there was no distraction left. He hugged me first. Not the quick, awkward kind he used to give, a real hug, firm, steady. "Thanks for not leaving," he said quietly into my shoulder. I swallowed hard. "Thanks for letting me stay," I answered, because that felt more honest. I walked back to the car before I could lose composure in front of him. I made it 2 blocks down the road before I had to pull over because my vision blurred too much to drive. The tears came fast and messy, the good kind. The kind you earn after years of alarms and paperwork and second jobs and doubt. The passenger seat felt empty without him. His water bottle still sat in the cup holder. A stray hair tie rested on the dashboard, small remnants of a life shared in close quarters for almost a decade. But the emptiness didn't feel like loss. It felt like proof. Proof that the terrified woman who stood on her porch in the rain holding a pharmacy bag had not failed. Proof that showing up again and again, even when it was inconvenient, even when it hurt, had built something real. Maren left that day years ago thinking she needed a reset. What she didn't understand was that you don't reset your life by running from it. You reset it by staying, and I stayed. And in staying I gained a son. Not by blood, not by accident, but by choice. And that choice built the best thing in my life. Life rarely hands you clean beginnings. It hands you messy Tuesdays, unexpected responsibility, and moments where walking away would be easier than staying. The real strength is showing up anyway. Build steady things. Protect your peace. Choose the people who choose you back. And if you enjoy stories about resilience with a side of karma, subscribe to Revenge Protocol on YouTube and drop a comment. We read them all.